The Ocean Star was a luxurious cruise ship, the pride of the Oceanic Cruises fleet. With a capacity for 3,000 passengers and 1,100 crew members, it was a floating city of steel and glass, filled with modern amenities and promises of exotic adventures. On that October night, as it left the port of Miami for a 2-week Caribbean cruise, no one on board could have imagined the nightmare that awaited them. The Ocean Star was a luxurious cruise ship, the pride of the Oceanic Cruises fleet. With a capacity for 3,000 passengers and 1,200 crew members, it was a floating city of steel and glass, filled with modern amenities and promises of exotic adventures. On that October night, as it left the port of Miami for a 2-week Caribbean cruise, no one on board could have imagined the nightmare that awaited them. As he observed the horizon from his command bridge, Hawthorne felt an unusual unease. The sky was clear, stars shining brightly, and the sea was calm. Still, something seemed wrong. "Is everything all right, Captain?" asked his first mate, James Foster. Hawthorne forced a smile. "Of course, James. Just one of those hunches. Probably nothing." But as the night progressed, Hawthorne's sense of discomfort only grew. The navigation instruments began to act strangely, oscillating between impossible readings. The compass spun wildly, ignoring magnetic north. "Must be some kind of electronic interference," muttered Foster, frowning at the flickering displays. Hawthorne wasn't so sure. In all his years at sea, he had never seen anything like it. That's when the fog appeared. It came out of nowhere, a white, impenetrable wall that engulfed the ship in a matter of minutes. Visibility dropped to zero. The sound of waves against the ship's hull ceased abruptly, as if they had entered a vacuum. "All engines, stop!" Hawthorne ordered. He dared not navigate blindly in these conditions. The silence that followed was oppressive. Not even the constant hum of the ship's engines could be heard. It was as if the world had simply disappeared. On the lower decks, passengers began to notice that something was wrong. The lights flickered intermittently, and a sense of penetrating cold spread throughout the ship, despite the climate control systems. Sarah Chen, a young history student on her first cruise, was at the deck bar when it all happened. She watched, fascinated and frightened, as the fog swallowed the ship. "What's going on?" she asked the bartender, a middle-aged man named Rick. Rick shook his head, his face pale in the dim light of the bar. "In 20 years working on cruises, I've never seen anything like this." That's when Sarah noticed something through the bar window, a faint light blinking in the fog. It looked like a ship. "Rick, are you seeing that?" she pointed. The bartender leaned over the counter, squinting. "It can't be. There shouldn't be any other ship nearby." As they watched, the light grew stronger and closer. Slowly, a shape began to emerge from the fog. It was indeed a ship, but not a modern one. It was an ancient galleon with tattered sails and rotting wood. It looked like it had come straight out of the 17th century, and it was heading directly for the Ocean Star. On the command bridge, Hawthorne and his team watched in horror as the ghost ship approached. "This is impossible," whispered Foster. Hawthorne grabbed the microphone of the ship's communication system. "Attention! All passengers and crew. Please proceed immediately to your cabins and lock the doors. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." But it was too late. With a deafening roar, the ghost galleon collided with the Ocean Star. But instead of causing physical damage, it simply passed through the modern hull. And then the real horror began. Spectral figures began to emerge from the galleon, floating through the walls of the Ocean Star as if they were made of smoke. There were dozens, then hundreds of translucent forms dressed in clothes from past eras. Sailors, passengers, all with expressions of terror frozen on their ethereal faces. Panic spread through the modern ship. Passengers screamed and ran. trying to escape the ghosts that now wandered the corridors and decks. Sarah found herself trapped in the bar with Rick and a handful of other terrified passengers. They watched, paralyzed with fear, as the specters passed through walls and furniture. "What do they want?" someone shouted. As if in response, one of the ghosts, the specter of a captain in an 18th century uniform, turned to the group. His voice was like the wind howling through torn sails. "Release! We need living souls to take our place." Sarah's blood ran cold. They weren't just ghosts, they were hunters. On the upper deck, Captain Hawthorne struggled to keep calm and protect his passengers. He had locked the command bridge, but he could hear the screams and chaos spreading throughout the ship. "James, we need to find a way to drive away this ghost ship," he said to his first mate. Foster, pale and trembling, nodded. "But how? Our weapons would pass right through them." Hawthorne frowned, his mind racing. Then a memory surfaced, an old sea legend his grandfather used to tell. "Salt," he muttered. "We need salt." Meanwhile, on the lower decks, the situation was worsening by the minute. The ghosts seemed to be looking for something, or someone. They passed through terrified passengers, leaving a trail of freezing cold. Sarah, gathering all her courage, decided she couldn't just stand by, waiting for the end. "We need to do something," she said to Rick and the others. "But what?" asked an elderly woman, clutching her pearl necklace as if it were a talisman. Sarah thought for a moment. Her history studies might be useful now. In ancient legends, salt and iron were used to ward off spirits, she said. "Do we have salt here in the bar?" Rick nodded, grabbing a large container of salt used for margaritas. "What about iron?" Sarah looked around, her eyes landing on an old fire extinguisher. "That will do." Armed with their improvised ghost repellents, the small group cautiously left the bar. The corridors were chaos, with passengers running in panic and specters floating in all directions. Sarah led the group, throwing handfuls of salt at ghosts that came too close. To her surprise and relief, it worked. The specters recoiled, hissing in pain. On the command bridge, Hawthorne had gathered all available crew. "Spread out across the ship," he ordered. "Use all the salt you can find. We need to force these spirits back to their own ship." The crew, still terrified, but trusting their captain, obeyed. They spread across the decks, armed with bags of salt from the kitchen and any iron objects they could find. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The ghosts, confronted with salt and iron, began to retreat. They floated back to their spectral galleon, howling in frustration and anger. Sarah and her group had managed to reach the main deck, where they joined the crew's efforts. She saw Captain Hawthorne coordinating the defense and ran to him. "Captain, they're looking for something, or someone," she gasped. "They said they need living souls to take their place." Hawthorne's eyes widened with understanding. "Of course, and they're trapped, unable to move on." At that moment, the ghost captain Sarah had seen before appeared before them. His face was a mask of eternal agony. "Please," he pleaded, his voice a distant echo of pain. "We've been trapped on this ship for centuries. We need release." Hawthorne stepped forward, facing the specter. "Not at the cost of my passengers and crew's lives," he said firmly. The ghost let out a howl of frustration that shook the very air. The fog around the ship began to swirl violently, like a supernatural cyclone. Sarah, her heart pounding, had an idea. "Wait," she shouted. "What if we could help you move on without taking our lives?" Both Hawthorne and the ghost captain turned to her, surprised. "How?" asked the specter, a spark of hope in his empty eyes. Sarah swallowed hard, praying that her knowledge of history and legends wouldn't let her down now. "You're trapped because you have unfinished business, right? If we can help you resolve that business, maybe you can move on naturally." The ghost captain seemed to consider her words. Slowly, he nodded. Our ship, the Queen's Vengeance, was sunk unjustly. We were accused of piracy, but we were innocent. We need the truth to be known. Hawthorne exchanged a look with Sarah. We can do that, he said. We have the means to research the history of your ship and clear your name. The Spectre seemed to hesitate for a moment, then nodded in agreement. Do this, and we will depart in peace. In the hours that followed, an uneasy truce was established. The ghosts returned to their ship, while Hawthorne, Sarah, and a team of officers and passengers with historical knowledge worked frantically. Using the ship's onboard computers and satellite internet connection, they scoured historical archives, ancient maritime records, and period accounts. Slowly, the true story of the Queen's Vengeance began to emerge. The ship had indeed been falsely accused. A corrupt Royal Navy officer had forged evidence of piracy to cover up his own crimes. The Queen's Vengeance and her crew had been unjustly condemned and sunk with all hands. When the truth was revealed to the ghost captain and his spectral crew, a notable change occurred. The supernatural fog began to dissipate, and a soft light enveloped the ghost galleon. You have fulfilled your promise, said the ghost captain, his voice now softer, almost at peace. Our story will be known. We can finally rest. Before the amazed eyes of everyone aboard the Ocean Star, the Queen's Vengeance and its spectral occupants began to fade. The light grew more intense, almost blinding, and then they were gone. The fog dissipated completely, revealing a clear, starry sky. The sea was calm, as if nothing had happened. In the days that followed, as the Ocean Star continued its voyage, passengers and crew struggled to process what they had experienced. Many were in shock, others elated to have survived something so extraordinary. Sarah found Captain Hawthorne on the command bridge the following night. He was looking thoughtfully at the horizon. Captain, she said softly, what do you think really happened? Hawthorne was silent for a long moment before answering. Miss Chen, I've spent my entire life at sea. I thought I knew it, that I had seen everything it could offer. He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the stars. But now, I realize there are more mysteries in the depths than we could ever imagine. Sarah nodded, feeling a shiver of excitement and fear. What will we do with this information? Will the world believe us? The captain smiled slightly. Some will believe, others won't. But those of us who were here, who saw, we know the truth. And maybe that's enough. As the Ocean Star sailed smoothly through the Caribbean waters, Sarah couldn't help but think about all the other secrets the vast ocean might be hiding. Ghost ships, lost souls, worlds beyond our understanding. The sea, she realized, was truly Earth's last great mystery, and she could hardly wait to explore more of its secrets.